I'm sorry.
It's so hard when you're filming. I'm so used to by myself.
It's probably easier.
All right, today I want to do a really quick video on my Central American Boa, Winston. There's tons of people that are always asking what size do Central American Boas get to, and it's an interesting question. And Central American Boas or Dwarf Boas are very, very interesting because they look exactly like Boas. They are Boas, but they are much smaller than something like a true red tail or a boa constrictor or BCC, as some of you might call it. So Winston is a 5-year-old Central American Boa. He's actually half Central American. He's 50% Sonoran Desert Boa and 50% Colombian. I'm gonna get into that more later. I know if you're new to boas and you're starting to get into it, it is very confusing with all the different species, subspecies, and localities. I'll give you some information on that focused on the Central American or the dwarf side. So if you are looking for a smaller boa, this will be a little bit of information for you. Now, what I want to show you is the size of him. So he's a male, which tends to stay smaller than females, and because he's 50-50, 50 Colombian, 50 Sonoran Desert Boa, he's probably even a little bit bigger than your average dwarf boa, but he's still quite small, so I'll show you that. So Sam is my filmographer today. She's my fiance. We're gonna do a weigh-in as well as a measurement, and that will give you a good indication of his size. Of course, snakes continue to grow through their whole life, but he's 5 years old, so most of his growing is done. So we'll get a good indication there, and then I'll come back after and I'll give you more information on Central American Boas. So let's pull him out. All right, so here, I'll give you guys a real quick shot of Winston. Can you see? Sam's scared of him, so she's backing away. But this is him, so he's quite small. Central American Boas tend to have slightly different patterns than the Colombians or the boa constrictors or the BCCs. But let's go weigh him and see what he is. All right, so we're gonna weigh him, and I have a little trick that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. I have this container here, and I have a hide inside the container, and let's see if we can get him to go in there, because that's usually the easiest way to coax him into going into this container. There we go. Obviously, snakes like to go into dark spots. All right, so we can take a look. So 1,894 grams. So again, pretty small. And we will now go measure him, and I'll show you another trick for measuring, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, depending on your animal. Come on, buddy. Okay, so now we're gonna try to measure him. The thing is he is extremely strong. Boas are very, very strong snakes. They like to really grab things. So now that he's gripping me, it might be hard to kind of get him off. But one trick you can do with the snake, and I'm probably gonna have to cut this until we get him to do it, is you put them against a wall and they tend to slither up against the wall. And sometimes my other boa does it really well. She just goes in this perfectly straight line and you make two little marks. So we'll see if we can get him to do it. I just gotta get him off. Okay, buddy, let's go. The great thing about boas is they are extremely curious. Keep going, buddy.
Do you want me to take one of the...
That's fine. Okay, there we go. So that's perfect, right there. Boom. There's our spots. We have our two. Yeah, sometimes they fall over. So let's go take a better look at him, and then we'll come back and we'll measure that. All right, so we'll see if we can get some decent shots of him so you guys can sort of see what he looks like. Again, I'm gonna get more into detail about what specifically he is and what you can expect if you wanna get a Central American Boa or a dwarf species of boa. And this is a full-grown boa, essentially. This is as big as they get. He's not gonna be an 8-foot, 9-foot giant. I can guarantee when we go measure that, it's gonna be around 5 feet, maybe not, maybe a little bit less. And really cool pattern, typical boa, lots of muscle definition through the body. And very, very curious. As you can see, if he wraps himself around that light, he'll take it down, so I wanna be a little bit careful. But I really love this snake. This is my very first snake that we ever got, so he's always been a great animal. Super nice, never struck, never bit. And Sam is terrified of him. And I'm pretty sure next week we're gonna try to get him to hold. So if you wanna see Sam hold the snake for the first time, you have to let me know in the comments, and I'm gonna try to make a video about that. We'll see. So he has a 6-foot enclosure. If anyone's wondering, this is an enclosure that I made a couple years ago. You can look it up as one of my very first videos, but it's 6 foot long. And let's go measure that spot. All right, so just gonna quickly measure between these two spots. So that was his tail down there, head here. So it's about 58.5 inches, so 4'10.5". So like I said, not even 5 feet. A nice sized animal. All right, so that is the end of that section of the video. Thanks, Sam, for helping me film. Normally it's me filming by myself, so that was a huge help. If you want to see her hold Winston for the first time, let me know in the comments. I actually want to have maybe even a short 5 or 10 minute discussion with her. It'd be kind of like a podcast, not a full podcast, something just for the YouTube channel, and we'll actually talk about her fear of snakes, something that we've not really talked about before, surprisingly. And then hopefully maybe at the end of that we can get her to hold a snake for the first time. Again, it's not going to be a clickbait, sensationalism, me throw a snake at her. It'll be more of seeing if we can overcome that fear, and it's a big fear of hers. She's actually really afraid of them. Maybe if you're afraid of snakes, it'll be something that will help you as well. So if you want to see that, let me know. All right, so we're going to jump into the second part of this video. We're going to discuss a little bit more about Central American Boas and Dwarf Boas to help you if you're looking for a smaller species of boa. So it is a few days later, and like I said, I want to explain a few of those confusing aspects when it comes to Central American Boas, or Dwarf Boas as they're sometimes called. I'm not going to go into super extensive detail because honestly, the further you go down the boa trail, the further things fragment, and it can get rather confusing. So especially if you're brand new to boas, I want to keep it fairly simple. This video should give you a more clear understanding of what a Central American Boa is and sort of what to expect in terms of the size. So I'll first start by quickly explaining those two acronyms that you for sure have seen floating around the web. That is BCC and BCI. So BCC stands for Boa Constrictor, and BCI stands for Boa Constrictor Imperator. Some people say Imperator. Now, Boa is the genus, Constrictor is the species, and Constrictor or Imperator is the subspecies. And to make things even a little bit more confusing, those two acronyms are now essentially scientifically obsolete. As according to the scientific literature, about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, or maybe more, those two species are now completely separated into their own species. So now we have the Boa Constrictor and the Boa Imperator. They are now genetically different enough to not be considered subspecies of the same species. Now, to the untrained eye, the difference between a Boa Constrictor and a Boa Imperator can be quite subtle, but I promise if you're new to boas, eventually you'll have no problem distinguishing the two. So as far as their natural habitat is concerned, there is the Andes mountain range that runs through the northern section of South America that splits the two home ranges completely apart. The Andes mountain range has acted as a giant geographical barrier between the two species for long enough for them to be considered two completely separate species. I think in the wild there are some cases of them interbreeding, but it's very rare, or it's in a very small section of Colombia or something. But other than that, for the most part, they are not interbreeding at all. So everything to the east of the Andes mountain range are your boa constrictors. Now, there are a few subspecies as well. We're not going to get into those for this video. So for the purpose of this video right now, we're just going to say everything from the east of the mountain are your boa constrictors. And these are your true red-tailed boas. Now, unfortunately, the term red-tailed boa has become somewhat of a catch-all phrase for all boa species, which is rather unfortunate because that makes things even more confusing. But the only true red-tailed boas are boa constrictors that you can find east of the Andes Mountains. These are your Guiana boas or your Suriname boas. And the easiest way to tell them apart from an imperator is the bright red tail. Boa imperators really don't have that bright red tail. They have burgundy or beige-ish or brownish tails, probably not beige, sort of a brownish tail, and with a little bit of red, but true red-tailed boas, true boa constrictors have a deep, deep red tail, and it just stands out right away. So that is the easiest way to tell them apart. Now we're going to travel on the other side of the Andes onto the west side of the mountain range. That is a section of Colombia as well as all of Central America. These are your boa imperators, and that's what we're talking about in this video. Now, because the boa imperators occupy such a diverse ecological niche, they range all the way from Colombia all the way up to Mexico, and they are all the same species, boa imperator, except for one, which I will get into a little bit because it's a little bit too confusing to say right now. But they are all essentially, or they all are the same exact species. However, they all occupy these different, really interesting ecological niches. And because of that, they develop different phenotypes or different morphologies, different sizes, different colors, slightly different patterns. And that is what we call localities. So if you ever hear the term locality, all that really means is you have a population of a species of animals that has developed different characteristics just due to the fact that it's evolved in a different ecological niche. So genetically, these boa imperators are all the exact same all the way from Colombia through Central America, but because you can find them in such interesting and specific ecological niches, they have developed different characteristics. Now, the main characteristic that we're going to be looking at is size. Central American boas are a lot smaller than boas in Colombia. Colombian boas tend to get quite large, so you're looking at 8 to 9 feet for females, maybe 6 to 7 feet for males. So anything called a Colombian Boa or sometimes a mainland Boa or a common Boa are typically bloodlines from Colombia, and they're going to get quite large. So if you're looking for a smaller Boa, you're going to want to stay away from those completely. Now, like I said, because they occupy such an interesting range or a very diverse range, sort of each country has different characteristics that you can call its own locality. Now, there is really no such thing as just a Central American Boa. That's kind of a hobby phrase, a catch-all phrase that really means that the Boa's bloodlines come from somewhere in Central America. But like I said, each island and each little country in Central America have a specific bloodline that make their Boas look a little bit different. So if you have something that's called a Central American Boa, it's probably a mix of a bunch of different things, or it could be a mix of a bunch of different things. And the reason I would say you should stay away from that is because it could have Colombian bloodline in it. And if it has Colombian blood in it, it's going to get a lot bigger than you're expecting a Central American Boa to get. So the one other thing, if you see a Central American Boa for sale at an expo that you really like, I would just ask the breeder what size the parents, where the parents come from, see if you can get some information on what country they came from, or at least what size they were, so you don't end up with a snake that's much larger than you were anticipating. Now, typically, Central American Boas are going to be 6 feet or less. I think that would be big. A female might get to 6 feet. Males are going to be 5 feet or less. And there's even a few localities of Central American Boas that get really, really small, like 4 feet for a sexually mature female and even 3 feet for a sexually mature male. And I'll kind of talk about those in a second. So because there's no such thing as a Central American Boa, and if you're buying something labeled as a Central American Boa, there's a good chance that it's a mix of things, or the breeder may actually not know what it is because things have been so mixed up in the hobby at this point. I would recommend looking for a Boa that has a specific country attached to it. Now, like I said, really each country in Central America does have its own bloodline of Boas, but they're not very common in the hobby. You might be able to find them, but for the most part, the 3 most common ones that I see all the time are Nicaraguan Boas, Hog Island Boas. Hog Island is a small island off the coast of Honduras, and it develops this really interesting pale pattern, almost like kind of a beigey, pink, and oranges. Really interesting looking Boa. Those are pretty common in the hobby. And again, they're a small species. All the Central American Boas are small. And the third most common one I see are the Sonoran Desert Boa. And the Sonoran Desert Boa is probably most common in the hobby because it has the leopard gene associated with it. So if you see a snake that's het leopard, which is a morph, or is a leopard Boa, it's going to have Sonoran blood in it. It doesn't mean it's 100% Sonoran, but it will come. The leopard morph only comes from the Sonoran bloodline. So any leopard Boa will have Sonoran blood in it. So as I said, those are the 3 most common Central American Boas that I've seen, and likely those are the ones that you're going to stumble across the most frequently. Doesn't mean you're not going to stumble across maybe a Costa Rican Boa or a Boa from El Salvador, for example. I just don't see those pop up very often. And there's one other locality of Central American Boa that I thought I would mention because they are so cool. That is the Boas found on the island Crawl Key, or Crawl Key Boas. This is an island that's just off the coast of Belize, and these Boas are tiny. At sexual maturity for females, around 4 feet, males are around 3 feet or 3.5 feet or something like that. Very, very small Boas. There are very few people that are working with that bloodline purely, so I have never seen one for sale, but if you stumble across one and you want a small Boa, that is going to be a very, very small Boa. So as I said earlier, the Boa world is very confusing, and honestly, at this point, things are so mixed up in terms of their bloodlines, you're not going to have a very good shot of finding a pure bloodline of a Central American locality. So your best bet is talking to the breeder and really understanding what the parents look like, the size of the parents, so you have a good idea of how big they're going to get. For example, when I bought Winston, who I said is 50% Sonoran Desert Boa and 50% Colombian, I really knew nothing about snakes, but I bought him from a breeder that labeled him as a leopard Boa. I didn't know what that meant, but he told me leopard Boas stay quite small, so that's what I wanted to start with. Now, that was a kind of a breeder that maybe didn't really know what he was talking about or didn't exactly know what it was. So I ended up doing way more research and eventually contacting, a couple breeders before him who had that bloodline and figured out that he was 50% Sonoran. That's how I learned that the leopard line is not a species of boa or anything. It is just a morph, but it comes through the Sonoran bloodline. So you might find things labeled all sorts of different ways. The best thing is find a reputable breeder and talk to them and understand what the parents were like. And I cannot recommend this book enough, The Complete Boa Constrictor by Vin Russo. That's where I've got all my information from. Now, this book is going on Amazon for like $350 because people love this book so much. However, Vin last year released the more Complete Boa Constrictor, and it is an updated version of that book, a book that I should probably pick up. So I have links to that in the description. I think it's only like $80 or $90, so it's not going to be $350. But if you want to know more about every single locality of boa and everything about each boa, that is where you need to go. There is just a wealth of information there. Everybody calls it the Boa Bible. I totally agree. It's an awesome read. It's all glossy pictures and everything, and this book itself is heavy because of that. I really love the book. So if you want more information, that is definitely where to go. Okay, so classic, I'm editing this video and I forgot to add something just like a couple videos ago. I really need to start making notes when I'm making a video. Anyway, so the two other things I really wanted to say are, one, if you are actually looking for specific bloodlines, like I said, at this point, the hobby is very mixed up. Bloodlines have been very bred together and interbred and hybridized. But if you are looking for something specific, then you should go to Russo's website. He's the gentleman that wrote that book. Cutting Edge Herp is where you can find him. Just Google that. You'll find him. He does work with specific clean bloodlines, and he's very much about keeping locality bloodlines together and clean. And if you are looking for a specific Cay Boa, for example, or Hog Island Boa, that is really where I would go, especially if you are in the United States. And the last thing I want to mention is, earlier on in this video, I said everything to the west of the Andes Mountains is a Boa imperator except for one. And I forgot to mention which one that was. And that is actually the Sonoran Desert Boa. The Sonoran Desert Boa recently, maybe 1 or 2 years ago, has been reclassified as its own species and is now Boa Sigma, which is a pretty awesome name. It's pretty cool. I didn't mention it earlier because it's not super relevant. It is just kind of a cool piece of information. And again, because things are always being scientifically updated, it's hard to stay up to date with everything. But now, technically, Sonoran Desert Boas, they're still Central American Boa, but they're Boa Sigma, not Boa Imperator. And if you want all of that information, I know Vin's new book, The More Boa Constrictor has, or The More Complete Boa Constrictor, has all of that updated genetic information and speciation and whatnot. All right, let's finish the video. All right, I think that pretty much covers it. If you have any more questions about Central American Boas or the size that they're gonna get, you can put that in the comments below. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you do wanna see the video of me and Sam having a conversation about her fear of snakes, and then maybe hopefully we get her to try to hold Winston, let me know in the comments. I think that could be a fun video to do, and maybe it will help people get over their fear of snakes as well. And give me a follow on Instagram at animalsathomec. You can come say hi in my DMs. I do answer all my DMs there, and I would really appreciate it if you went and checked out the podcast. Last week's episode, I talked to Josh Willard from Josh's Frogs. Awesome conversation. I really recommend going to check that out. Make sure you hit subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss the weekly content. I will see you guys next week.